The frame-up. Angela Williams was no stranger to adversity. As one of the most respected attorneys in her city, she had built her career fighting corruption and standing up for those society had overlooked. Her name was synonymous with justice, and her reputation had made her both admired and feared. But her unwavering commitment to fairness also made her a target. Angela had recently taken on a high-profile case exposing a web of corruption involving police officers and city officials. It was the kind of case that ruffled feathers, the kind that earned her threats and whispers behind closed doors. Among those she had called out were officers Bradley and Connors, two men known for their rough tactics and unspoken immunity in the force. They were not just corrupt, they were dangerous. They had too much to lose if Angela's case succeeded, and too much power to allow her to continue unchecked. A routine day turns dark. It began like any other day. Angela had just wrapped up a strategy meeting with her legal team when she decided to grab a late coffee. She drove to her favorite cafe, parked her car, and walked inside. She barely noticed the two men watching her from across the street. Bradley and Connors had spent weeks orchestrating their plan. They knew every detail about Angela's routine, her habits, even the places she felt safest. They were meticulous because they had to be. Framing someone as sharp and vigilant as Angela would require precision. As Angela returned to her car, she found the parking spot strangely deserted. It felt off, but she dismissed it as paranoia. The moment she opened her car door, she saw it, a duffel bag sitting in the passenger seat. Confused, she leaned in to inspect it, only to hear a voice behind her. "Step away from the vehicle, ma'am," Bradley ordered, his hand resting on his holstered gun. Connor stood beside him, smirking. "Looks like we've got ourselves a situation." The arrest. Angela froze, her mind racing. "This isn't my bag," she said firmly, stepping back with her hands visible. Bradley didn't hesitate. He opened the duffel and pulled out several clear plastic bags filled with a white powdery substance. "Possession with intent to distribute," he announced, loud enough for the few nearby pedestrians to hear. "That's not mine," Angela repeated, her voice steady but edged with disbelief. "You know it's not." Connors chuckled. "Tell it to the judge." Before Angela could respond, she was cuffed and pushed into the back of their squad car. She knew better than to resist. She also knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Her mind raced, trying to piece together their motives as the car sped away. Corruption runs deep. Angela was processed like any other suspect. Her fingerprints were taken, her belongings confiscated, and she was placed in a holding cell. But this wasn't just an arrest, it was a carefully orchestrated character assassination. Within hours, news outlets were running the story, prominent attorney arrested for drug possession. Her face was plastered across every screen, the headlines designed to destroy her credibility. Angela's first call was to her best friend and legal partner, Sarah. "They've set me up," Angela said, her voice calm but urgent. "Bradley and Connors. They planted drugs in my car." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'm on it. We'll get you out of this." But Angela knew the fight would be uphill. She wasn't just up against two rogue cops, she was up against a system designed to protect them. And when Sarah called back later that evening, the news was worse than Angela had expected. "The judge assigned to your case is Grant Mason," Sarah said, her voice heavy with concern. Angela's stomach sank. Judge Mason was notorious for his leniency toward law enforcement and his harsh sentences for defendants. He was also rumored to be on the payroll of several corrupt officials. If Mason was involved, it meant this setup wasn't just about Bradley and Connors, it was part of something much bigger. The battle begins. Angela spent the night in her cell, her mind racing. She reviewed every detail of her arrest, every interaction she'd had with Bradley and Connors. She knew their motive was to silence her, to discredit her, before her corruption case gained traction. But what she didn't know was how far their network extended. The next morning, Angela was brought before Judge Mason for her bail hearing. Bradley and Connors sat smugly in the courtroom, their fabricated evidence presented as indisputable fact. Mason, true to form, denied Angela bail, citing the serious nature of her charges. She was to remain in custody until her trial. As she was led back to her cell, Angela caught Bradley's eye. He smirked, leaning slightly toward her as she passed. "You should have kept your nose out of our business." Angela didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her resolve hardened. If they thought she would crumble, they didn't know who they were dealing with. A glimmer of hope. Back in her cell, Angela began formulating a plan. She wasn't just any defendant, she was a seasoned attorney with connections, resources, and an unshakable belief in justice. She would fight this, not just for herself, but for every person who had been silenced by corruption. Her first step was to reach out to her network, including a trusted journalist who had worked with her on previous cases. Angela knew that public exposure could be her most powerful weapon. If she could prove her innocence and expose the corruption behind her arrest, she wouldn't just clear her name, she'd bring down an entire system. But she also knew the risks. Bradley, Connors, and Mason wouldn't go down without a fight. And as Angela stared at the cold, gray walls of her cell, she realized the fight was just beginning. The hidden truth. Angela Williams wasn't about to let two corrupt cops and a crooked judge destroy her life. As she sat in her cell, she began leveraging every ounce of her legal expertise and connections. If the system thought it could outmaneuver her, it was about to learn otherwise. Uncovering the evidence. The first step was to gather evidence. Angela's best friend and legal partner, Sarah, had been working tirelessly since the arrest. While Angela couldn't actively lead her own defense, she guided Sarah through coded messages during phone calls. "Check the timing of the arrest against my schedule," Angela suggested in one call. "They knew exactly when I'd be at that cafe. They've been watching me." Sarah followed Angela's lead, pulling surveillance footage from nearby businesses and city traffic cameras. The footage revealed Bradley and Connors tailing Angela's car for hours before the arrest. It wasn't solid proof, but it was enough to raise questions. Meanwhile, Angela began building her defense from within her cell. She carefully reviewed every piece of fabricated evidence brought against her, looking for inconsistencies. Her intimate knowledge of how police operated gave her an edge. She knew there would be a mistake, a missing chain of custody document, a timestamp that didn't add up, or a fingerprint that shouldn't be there. Flashbacks to Angela's past. As Angela pieced things together, her thoughts often drifted to her past. She had grown up in a rough neighborhood, where corruption wasn't just a concept, it was a way of life. Cops took bribes, judges turned a blind eye, and justice was a commodity only the wealthy could afford. Her father, a former civil rights activist, had instilled in her a deep sense of justice. He often told her, "If you see wrong and do nothing, you're part of the problem." Those words had guided her through law school, where she graduated at the top of her class, and into her career as a fierce advocate for change. Angela had fought many battles before, taking on powerful corporations, politicians, and police departments. Her victories had earned her enemies, but they had also built her a network of allies, people who believed in her and were willing to help. A mysterious ally. As the days passed, strange things began happening. A prominent news outlet published an anonymous exposé detailing a pattern of illegal activities by officers Bradley and Connors. The article outlined cases where the officers had planted evidence, coerced confessions, and falsified reports. It also hinted at their connections to Judge Mason, who had a suspicious record of dismissing complaints against law enforcement. Angela was as surprised as anyone. She hadn't contacted the press, her phone calls were monitored, and she couldn't risk tipping her hand. Whoever was behind the leaks clearly had access to damning information and wanted to help. Sarah managed to get a private message to Angela through their shared legal assistant. "We don't know who's feeding the press, but it's helping," Sarah wrote. The tide's starting to turn. A growing movement. Outside the jail, Angela's supporters began organizing. Activists, community leaders, and even some of Angela's former clients rallied to her cause. They held protests, demanding an independent investigation into her arrest. Social media exploded with hashtags like #FreeAngela and #JusticeForAngela. The exposé on Bradley and Connors gained traction, and more victims of their misconduct came forward. Each new revelation chipped away at their credibility and added weight to Angela's claims of being framed. Part 3: Unmasking Corruption. The public turns. The media frenzy surrounding Angela's case reached a boiling point when a well-known journalist, Marcus Lane, published an investigative piece connecting Judge Mason to a series of suspicious rulings. The article revealed that Mason had dismissed several major corruption cases, all involving law enforcement. It also uncovered financial irregularities in Mason's campaign donations, suggesting he had accepted bribes. Angela, watching the news from her cell, felt a flicker of hope. The walls were closing in on her enemies. The court case unravels. Angela's legal team filed a motion to challenge the validity of the evidence against her, citing the growing allegations against Bradley, Connors, and Mason. In a dramatic pretrial hearing, Sarah argued that Angela's arrest was part of a larger conspiracy to silence her. The defense called on Marcus Lane to testify about his findings. He presented documents showing that Mason had received a series of unexplained payments shortly before Angela's arrest. The judge overseeing the hearing had no choice but to order an independent review of the case. For the first time since her arrest, Angela saw the fear in Bradley and Connors' eyes as they left the courtroom. The cracks in their plan were beginning to show. Angela's secret plan. While her legal team worked to dismantle the case, Angela quietly activated another part of her strategy. She reached out to a powerful connection, her former mentor, retired Judge Olivia Carter. Olivia had always been a staunch ally, and her influence in the legal community was unmatched. Angela's message to Olivia was simple: it's time to clean house. Olivia didn't disappoint. She used her network to pressure the district attorney's office into reopening several cases involving Bradley and Connors. As their past misconduct came to light, the DA had no choice but to suspend them pending further investigation. A turning point. The pressure on Mason, Bradley, and Connors reached its peak when Olivia arranged for a federal oversight committee to review Angela's case. The committee's findings were damning. The evidence against Angela was deemed highly questionable, and Mason's handling of the case was called into question. With their credibility shattered and public opinion firmly on Angela's side, it became clear that the system was no longer working in favor of the corrupt. The shocking revelation. Angela had always kept her personal life separate from her professional one. She preferred to be judged by her abilities, not her family connections. But now, cornered by a corrupt system bent on destroying her, she decided it was time to play her ace. Revealing her true identity. The courtroom was packed the day Angela took the stand in her own defense. The case had become a media circus, with journalists, activists, and spectators filling every seat. Bradley and Connors sat confidently at the prosecution table, while Judge Mason presided with his usual stern demeanor. Angela, calm and composed, began her testimony by recounting the events leading to her arrest. She highlighted the inconsistencies in the evidence, the questionable timing of her arrest, and the blatant attempts to the fallout. Angela's revelation set off a chain reaction. Within hours, news outlets were running stories about her connection to Senator Clark, speculating on the repercussions for her case. Bradley and Connors, once smug and untouchable, found themselves at the center of a firestorm. Investigations into their past cases intensified, uncovering a litany of misconduct. Judge Mason, too, faced scrutiny. The leaked documents connecting him to bribes and questionable rulings were now front-page news. The public demanded his resignation, and protests outside the courthouse grew louder by the hour. Angela's legal team seized the momentum. Sarah filed motions to disqualify Mason from the case, citing his conflicts of interest and unethical conduct. The motion was granted, and a new judge, known for their integrity, was appointed to oversee the proceedings. The courtroom showdown. The day Angela's trial resumed under the new judge, the atmosphere was electric. This time, Angela wasn't just defending herself, she was exposing an entire conspiracy. She began by dismantling the prosecution's case, piece by piece. Using surveillance footage, she proved that Bradley and Connors had followed her for hours before her arrest, contradicting their claim that they had found the drugs by chance. Chain of custody records for the planted evidence were incomplete, and forensic analysis revealed no fingerprints linking Angela to the drugs. Then came the piece de resistance. Angela presented financial records, leaked anonymously, showing a series of payments from Bradley and Connors to a shell company tied to Judge Mason. The payments coincided with key dates in her case, including the day Mason denied her bail. Angela paused, letting the evidence sink in before addressing the court directly. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice resonating through the room. "This is about a system that protects the corrupt and punishes the innocent. But today, that system is being held accountable." A crumbling defense. Bradley and Connors tried to defend themselves, but their arguments fell flat. The mounting evidence against them, combined with Angela's compelling testimony, left little room for doubt. Even their attorney seemed to lose confidence, offering weak objections and avoiding eye contact with the jury. Judge Mason, subpoenaed to testify, was visibly shaken as Angela's team grilled him on his financial records. Under pressure, he admitted to accepting gifts from law enforcement officials, though he denied they influenced his rulings. His denial did little to sway the jury, who saw through his thinly veiled excuses. Angela's triumph. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than a day before reaching their verdict, not guilty. The courtroom erupted in applause as Angela stood victorious. But for her, the trial was just the beginning. In the days following the verdict, Bradley and Connors were arrested on charges of evidence tampering, conspiracy, and misconduct. Judge Mason was removed from the bench and faced his own legal battle. Angela, meanwhile, used her platform to push for systemic reforms, calling for greater accountability in law enforcement and the judiciary. Angela's revelation of her true identity had turned the tide, but it was her resilience, intelligence, and determination that had won the day. As she walked out of the courthouse, surrounded by supporters, she knew her fight for justice was far from over. But for now, she could take pride in knowing she had turned the system's weapons against it, proving that no one, not even the corrupt, was above the law. Justice and change. The fall of officers Bradley, Connors, and Judge Mason marked the beginning of a ripple effect that shook the city's corrupt power structure. Angela Williams didn't just win her case, she ignited a movement that would bring systemic change to a broken system. Consequences for the guilty. The arrests of Bradley, Connors, and Mason were swift and public. Video footage of their perp walks dominated the news, their faces grim as reporters shouted questions. The charges against them were extensive: evidence tampering, conspiracy, abuse of power, and accepting bribes. Bradley and Connors faced multiple lawsuits from victims of their misconduct. Families who had been wrongfully convicted or extorted came forward, emboldened by Angela's victory. The city launched an internal review of their police department, uncovering even more officers involved in similar schemes. Bradley and Connors were just the tip of the iceberg. Judge Mason, once considered untouchable, was disbarred and sentenced to prison. His downfall sent shockwaves through the judiciary, leading to the resignation of several other judges implicated in corruption scandals. It was a reckoning long overdue. Angela's next chapter. Angela's exoneration wasn't just a personal victory, it was a catalyst for change. She used the media attention surrounding her case to launch a campaign against systemic corruption. Partnering with activists, legal experts, and community leaders, Angela spearheaded the Justice Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to holding institutions accountable. The Justice Initiative focused on 3 key areas: police reform, advocating for body cameras, independent oversight, and stricter penalties for misconduct; judicial accountability, pushing for transparent judicial appointments and regular reviews of judges' decisions to prevent bias and corruption; community empowerment, offering legal aid and resources to marginalized communities disproportionately affected by systemic injustice. Angela's work quickly gained traction. Donations poured in, and high-profile figures joined her cause, including her father, Senator Henry Clark. Together, they lobbied for federal legislation to address corruption at all levels of government. Public support and resistance. While Angela's movement was met with widespread support, it also faced resistance. Some police unions and conservative groups accused her of vilifying law enforcement. Others tried to paint her as a privileged figure, using her family's influence for personal gain. Angela addressed these criticisms head-on. "This isn't about vilifying anyone," she said during a televised interview. "It's about accountability. No one, not police officers, not judges, not even me, is above the law. That's the foundation of justice." Her honesty and integrity won over many skeptics. Polls showed increasing public support for the reforms she championed, and grassroots movements inspired by her story sprang up in other cities. A legacy of change. Within a year of Angela's victory, significant progress had been made. Bradley and Connors were convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Their case became a national example of the consequences of police corruption. A federal task force was established to investigate judicial misconduct, starting with the cases linked to Mason. Angela's Justice Initiative successfully advocated for the passage of the Fair Justice Act, which introduced sweeping reforms in policing and judicial oversight. Angela's work didn't stop there. She continued to take on high-profile cases, using her platform to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced. Her story became a symbol of resilience and the power of fighting for what's right, inspiring countless others to stand up against injustice. Reflection. One evening, after a long day of meetings and court appearances, Angela sat in her office, looking out at the city skyline. Her journey had been grueling, but it had also reaffirmed her belief in the power of persistence and truth. Her father's words echoed in her mind, "If you see wrong and do nothing, you're part of the problem." Angela had chosen to fight, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved justice. And in doing so, she had helped transform a broken system into something better. As she closed her laptop and prepared to head home, her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. It was a simple text, but it said everything. "We're making a difference." Angela smiled. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Justice, she realized, wasn't just a goal, it was a journey. And she was determined to see it through to the end. Angela's work quickly gained traction. Donations poured in, and high-profile figures joined her cause, including her father, Senator Henry Clark. Together, they lobbied for federal legislation to address corruption at all levels of government. Public support and resistance. While Angela's movement was met with widespread support, it also faced resistance. Some police unions and conservative groups accused her of vilifying law enforcement. Others tried to paint her as a privileged figure, using her family's influence for personal gain. Angela addressed these criticisms head-on. "This isn't about vilifying anyone," she said during a televised interview. "It's about accountability. No one, not police officers, not judges, not even me, is above the law. That's the foundation of justice." Her honesty and integrity won over many skeptics. Polls showed increasing public support for the reforms she championed, and grassroots movements inspired by her story sprang up in other cities. A legacy of change. Within a year of Angela's victory, significant progress had been made. Bradley and Connors were convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Their case became a national example of the consequences of police corruption. A federal task force was established to investigate judicial misconduct, starting with the cases linked to Mason. Angela's Justice Initiative successfully advocated for the passage of the Fair Justice Act, which introduced sweeping reforms in policing and judicial oversight. Angela's work didn't stop there. She continued to take on high-profile cases, using her platform to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced. Her story became a symbol of resilience and the power of fighting for what's right, inspiring countless others to stand up against injustice. Reflection. One evening, after a long day of meetings and court appearances, Angela sat in her office, looking out at the city skyline. Her journey had been grueling, but it had also reaffirmed her belief in the power of persistence and truth. Her father's words echoed in her mind, "If you see wrong and do nothing, you're part of the problem." Angela had chosen to fight, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved justice. And in doing so, she had helped transform a broken system into something better. As she closed her laptop and prepared to head home, her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. It was a simple text, but it said everything. "We're making a difference." Angela smiled. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Justice, she realized, wasn't just a goal, it was a journey. And she was determined to see it through to the end. A new dawn. Angela Williams' victory over corruption became the foundation for a transformative movement that reached far beyond the courtroom. The impact of her efforts resonated across the nation, igniting a wave of reforms and sparking hope in communities that had long been marginalized by systemic injustice. Building a stronger system. Angela's Justice Initiative expanded rapidly, establishing chapters in cities across the country. Each chapter focused on local issues, working to identify and dismantle corruption within their communities. The organization became a beacon for change, attracting passionate lawyers, activists, and community leaders. Key achievements of the Justice Initiative included whistleblower protections, advocating for and securing stronger legal safeguards for individuals who exposed corruption within law enforcement and the judiciary. Transparency reforms, pushing for public access to police disciplinary records and judicial performance reviews, ensuring accountability. Civic education, hosting workshops to educate citizens about their legal rights and how to hold public officials accountable. Angela's vision of a more transparent and equitable system began to take shape. Police departments implemented new training programs centered on de-escalation and community engagement, while courts adopted stricter guidelines to prevent conflicts of interest and undue influence. Inspiring the next generation. Angela's story became a rallying cry for a new generation of activists and leaders. Her resilience in the face of adversity inspired students, young lawyers, and advocates to pursue careers in public service. Colleges and universities invited Angela to speak, and her lectures often drew standing-room-only crowds. "The fight for justice isn't just a legal battle," she told one audience. "It's a moral imperative. We all have a role to play." She also mentored young attorneys, sharing the lessons she had learned and encouraging them to approach their work with compassion and integrity. For Angela, her greatest legacy wasn't the laws she helped change, it was the people she empowered to continue the fight. Facing new challenges. While Angela's efforts brought significant progress, they also attracted powerful opposition. Lobbyists for police unions and private prison corporations worked tirelessly to undermine her initiatives. Politicians who benefited from the old system labeled her a radical, accusing her of threatening public safety. But Angela had faced worse, and she wasn't intimidated. She continued to build coalitions, working with unlikely allies to advance her cause. Her ability to bridge divides and focus on common goals made her a formidable force, even in the face of resistance. A national movement. Over time, Angela's work began to influence national policy. The federal government adopted many of the reforms championed by the Justice Initiative, including the establishment of an independent body to investigate police misconduct and judicial corruption. Angela testified before Congress on multiple occasions, sharing her insights and advocating for systemic change. Her calm demeanor and incisive arguments won over even her harshest critics. By the time the National Accountability Act was passed, Angela's name was synonymous with justice. Personal growth. Amid her professional successes, Angela found moments of personal fulfillment as well. She reconnected with her family, particularly her father, Senator Henry Clark. Their shared commitment to justice brought them closer than ever, and they often worked together on initiatives aimed at systemic reform. Angela also found time to heal. The trauma of her wrongful arrest had left scars, but she refused to let it define her. She sought therapy, leaned on her friends, and allowed herself to feel joy again. For Angela, self-care wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity, one that gave her the strength to continue her work. Looking forward. Years after her case, Angela stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Williams Center for Justice and Equity, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to legal advocacy and community empowerment. The center was named in her honor, but was built for the people she had always fought to protect. As she looked out at the crowd, a mix of activists, community members, and young leaders, Angela felt a deep sense of gratitude. The fight for justice was far from over, but they were making progress, one step at a time. In her closing speech, Angela reminded everyone of the lesson she had carried with her since childhood. Change doesn't happen overnight. It takes courage, resilience, and the willingness to stand up, even when the odds are against you. Together, we've proven that justice isn't just a dream, it's something we can build, one case, one law, and one community at a time. The crowd erupted in applause, and Angela smiled. Her journey had been long and arduous, but it was far from over. With every challenge, every victory, and every setback, she remained steadfast in her mission, to ensure that justice prevailed, no matter the cost. And so, Angela's legacy continued, a testament to the power of resilience, truth, and the unyielding pursuit of what is right.